I want to follow up the Second and Charles story I did last time. So Second and Charles is a secondhand store, Second and Charles, where you can trade. And it's a used media store for books, music CDs, movies, and video games. Used video games. So someone informed me that they talked with an employee at the Augusta, Georgia location, one of the 30 locations, and was told that there's it's now corporate policy that unusable games can be thrown out. So there was some blowback from that in terms of some YouTubers saying that's not true. They still have a free bin, which, by the way, I never said there was no more free bin in the video, nor did that guy say there wasn't a free bin. It's just that he said less things showed up in the free bin from in the past after he was informed of this new policy. That was the main sticking point in his mind. So there was that, but then there was also supporting facts like, well, yeah, I dumpster dive at Second and Charles and I find consoles. That people were saying that in the comments as well. Which again, you don't know if that's coming from the Second and Charles employees and staff themselves. Who knows? It's 30 locations. Corporate policy does not necessarily always trickle down to what actually happens at individual stores, as we know. So the social media manager of Second and Charles saw the podcast segment, though, and got in touch with me and wanted to clarify a few things. I will start by saying this. She was very, very nice. And I did not grill her, but I really wanted to find out how the retro game buying and selling trade-in program worked at Second and Charles, since I was not really familiar from the start with this, as I said in the last podcast, in this chain. And they're fairly new from what I understand. So I asked her a few things. I first asked, because at first it wasn't clear what game systems are in each store to test. So this is the list she told me. That she said, I've confirmed we have several systems in our stores that allow us to test a variety of gaming systems at all 30 Second and Charles locations. So maybe you can confirm this in the comments. Do they have in every location NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, DS, GameCube, Wii, Wii U, Genesis, PS, PS2, PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One? She followed up. Other than that, the buyback for, and I spoke to her for like 25 minutes, but this was the email, the follow-up email. Other than that, the buyback for used games and consoles is on a case-by-case basis. To reiterate, buyback is determined for games and consoles based on if we can easily, I'll come back to that, easily confirm playability and inventory need. Second and Charles employees do not put items into the free bin unless it is their personal property, and as I stated, items are cycled out of the free bins rather quickly due to the fact that they are free. So that was something that I questioned on, because what I'll get into is the fact that while Second and Charles employees cannot put items into the free bin, they can take them out to dispose of them, which I'll get into. But she claims that's rare, the social media manager, because in her estimation, this is from Second and Charles Corporate, that there's turnover that's so high every week that they don't get a chance to do that. Again, I don't know how much you can verify that unless you have a surveillance camera watching all 30 locations in the free bins to know that. I don't know. But, okay, we'll come back to that. As for the corporate policies mentioned in yesterday's podcast, we are a buy-sell trade culture that embraces retro and vintage everything. It is not, nor has it ever been a policy of the companies to throw anything away. We do and will continue to use our free bins at all of our 30 locations, which, again, we never said that there was not free bins there. That was never a point of contention that they were getting rid of their free bins, from what I understand from my podcast. It's just that maybe they're starting to throw stuff out. So this is from the parent company's Books A Million, by the way, just so we get that clear. So I want to come back to something here. Again, corporate policy doesn't always necessarily trickle down to the front lines. So we can go off of two different thoughts here. Either the person received bad information from the manager in Augusta, Georgia, had an axe to grind himself, or the employee had an axe to grind, or was given false information from his manager. There's a lot of ways you can look at this. In terms of the buyback situations differing, they're based upon a few things. Storage concerns. If there's not storage for a particular item, they may be able to turn it away. That's one key. They have, this is all in quotes, this is told me, standards of functionality and standards of cleanliness. If you recall from the last podcast, one of the main points about a game being usable and sellable was that it had to be able to be cleaned easily. And I confirm that. Like, if this is a gunked up or bad label, they're not going to want it for a video game or for a book, from what I understand. It has to be maybe not quite new, but presentable for the shelf. That's how I understood it. They don't want stuff that's in fair condition or beat up. They want stuff that looks like presentable. And I'll get into why that's an issue in a bit. So they have standards of functionality for their trade-ins for video games and standards of cleanliness. So I come in with a video game, an NES. If the labels looks a little bit off to them, that's up to the individual employee to say, okay, no, we don't want this. It looks dirty. You can have the option then to put it in the free bin, because according to the corporate mandate, the employees themselves aren't doing that. So he's telling me it's no good. I'm an average person off the street. Okay? At that point then, what if this is a game, any game, I don't know, Deathbots, a game where the labels to begin with, because it's an American video entertainment game, they're not all good to begin with. If I'm an average person and I don't want to do the research, or maybe I'm in a rush or just found this stuff, what if I take that to mean my game was worthless and I throw it in the trash myself and I don't throw it in the free bin? That's a possibility. That's a real possibility. But here's a more important possibility, and one that I think is being missed here in this conversation, which will link back to GameStop and their retro initiative. What if I bring in an NES game that doesn't turn on right away? Does that employee know, or is that employee qualified to know why that game's not working? Is he qualified, or has he been instructed to clean that game and to test it thoroughly, as would be done in a traditional retro game store like Luna Video Games? Or after standards of functionality, in quotes, are not met, will that game then come back to me and I'm told my Deathbots is unsellable because it's not working? And maybe the employee doesn't know any better? Hell, remember, these are employees that are dealing with books, CDs, DVDs, and video games. It's hard to be an expert on one of these, let alone all four, and I would argue that retro video games is the hardest of them all in order to manage, and in order to test for, and to know what the hell's going on with that particular console and that game library. So I can envision tons of scenarios where people walk in with games that could be a little dirty, or hell, maybe the system it's being tested on is dirty. The NES is notorious for being a finicky system. That main pin can get very dirty. Are they cleaning those systems out? Or is one person bringing in 10 games, none of them are powering up, so those are unsellable because they don't have the standards of functionality? Then I'm told the games are worthless, and since I don't know any better, I throw them in the dumpster because I don't want to put them in the free bin because they're no good. You don't think that's a possibility? Is that insane to think? I don't think that's insane. That seems reasonable, because when you have employees that aren't experts at retro video games, that's what happens. We've seen it with GameStop. We've seen people accept games that weren't the right game, were counterfeits, were pirated carts. And that's at a game store with game store employees. This is a general media store. These are not experts. Are they trained to know what to look for? That's all the conversation, but I'll bring it up now. I'm thinking of it now. Are they trained to look for counterfeit labels or swapped ROM boards? I don't know, a GBA Pokemon fake. Are they trained to know what to look for? Probably not, because they're not at GameStop. Hell, they're not in the front line of GameStop. They ship them back somewhere to be looked at anyway, and we could say whether or not that's been effective or not. But at a store like Second and Charles, where they're dealing with, again, games, movies, books, and music at the same time, you really think they're on the time and expertise to know all these systems in and out? You really think that to begin with? To know, besides the game is a little bit dirty and saying it's not acceptable, to say that the functionality is not up to par? This comes to another part now, and this is where I might hear back from Second and Charles, because I didn't get a clear answer, and I'm not sure there was a clear corporate policy on this. So if it's corporate policy that employees there tell the customer if the game, quote unquote, doesn't doesn't have the standards of cleanliness, whatever the hell that really means, and or standards of functionality aren't met, that put it into the free bin. So then I go put it in the free bin, and then at that point, what happens if that game's not picked up? What happens if that console that doesn't meet the standards of functionality is in there? Well, I ask, can games be then taken out of those free bins? Are items taken out of those free bins? Free bins, books, CDs. And I was told by corporate, yes, employees can look in those free bins and they can take out items that are, in quotes, unusable. So if it's a completely unusable video game, that's a direct quote, they can take it out of the free bin. I was told that if it's a disc that's scratched up, maybe it's a console where a part's missing, and I was told, well, it's not usable, so they take it out. What do you think happens to it then? Do you think they keep it on the shelf? Or is it chucked out? Let's be reasonable. But that's the danger. Why am I letting employees at a media store, a general media store, to decide what is and what is not, quote unquote, up to the standards of cleanliness to begin with, the standards of functionality to turn it away, but then once it's in the free bin, they get to decide what's unusable or not. So because an NES is missing the front cartridge door on it, does that mean it's unusable? Not to me, not to you out there, not to anyone who knows anything about retro games, but to that employee, maybe it does and it gets chucked out. I don't know. This is what's so iffy and weird about this, where it's almost a shame that they have the free bin to begin with. Yes, it's good for the random person. If you're in that area, you know you're going to hit it up. And now you better hit it up, because now you can have stuff that's quote unquote completely unusable thrown out. What if the disc is scratched on a game, but it can be refinished? What if it's a game, a rare game, and maybe just the case is there, and maybe it's missing the game, like a Mutant League Hockey? What if the label's ripped up on a Mutant League Hockey? I've seen it, the one I found at my swap meet. Now it might be thrown out, or God knows, who knows what happens to it, because some employee there says it's completely unusable. Why do they get to decide that? I'd be a lot more comfortable if that employee or if it was corporate policy, at least for the retro video games. Now books, books are a dime a dozen, literally. You don't have to worry about that as much, and that's a lot easier to deal with. But I'd be more comfortable if they found either a local mom and pop retro game shop, or I don't care, even a dirt flea market seller or a local eBay reseller, where instead of deciding that stuff is completely unusable, because I'm so uncomfortable with that term, taking all that stuff out of that free bin that you're ready to chuck out in your eyes, putting it aside, contacting someone locally, and letting them decide. Letting them decide if it's worthless, because at least those people have the knowledge that you don't, that your store doesn't. Unless every one of your 30 locations has multiple employees that are experts in retro video games, because I highly doubt that's the case. Because I even asked if they will have employees look and test everything in the free bin, and that's not happening. Again, if it's a quote-unquote completely unusable video game, which could mean either the standards of functionality, they're not testing the game in the free bin, that's a waste of their time, or the standards of cleanliness, that could be the reason it's there. If that's not met, they can say it's completely unusable. Which brings me to another part, though. And this is where stuff would get thrown out. They have a clearance section, I was told. And again, the woman was very nice on the phone. And it's not, and she's just, she's relaying what's a corporate policy, which I totally understand. So it's not on her. But I'm just a little agitated about this, because we're not all fools about what corporations do. We know that GameStop has thrown out stuff. Companies do this. They're there to make money. They're not there for goodwill. Hell, even Goodwill could technically not be there for goodwill. It's a whole other conversation. Anyway, but they have a clearance section, and if stuff's been in the clearance section for a while, it gets sent back to the corporate warehouse, or the main warehouse. What do you think happens then? I don't know if they're selling that stuff online. Do you think they're more likely to ship out clearance items, a PS2 Texas Hold'em game? Are they going to ship that out and waste the money to ship it to a warehouse and then ship it elsewhere, across the country? Are they more likely to do that, or to damage out that game, throw it out, and then write it off as a tax deduction since they paid someone for that game to begin with. What do you think's more likely, the more likely scenario? Tossing it at that point or not? And that's the issue here. When you have companies getting into a market, like GameStop getting back into the retro game market, well, they're not experts at it. They're not caretakers of it. They don't have the passion for it. They're corporate speak and say whatever they want about, well, you know, culture embraces retro and vintage everything. All right. That's what you say. So show me then your training manual for retro games for your stores, for every one of these systems. Show me what the procedure is for cleaning for these systems. Show me in black and white what it means for a game to be completely unusable in either standards of functionality or standards of cleanliness. Is there a chart from 1 to 10 where 5 is acceptable and 4 is not for how clean a game is before you reject it and tell some grandma off the street, well, that Super Mario 3 cartridge, a little too dirty for me. We can't sell it. So that grandma then chucks it in the garbage? Because it's up to her. If she thinks it's... That's the problem. Because the store says it's unusable, the average person might think it's worthless to anyone else. They don't know. They don't know the retro game scene or hobby, so they might chuck it in the dumpster instead of even throwing the free bin. I have so many problems now and more questions about this free bin now that I know about it. I really do. So that's it on this topic. I don't want to talk about this really again. Again, this isn't... I'm not saying Second and Charles is being nefarious here. I just think it's a corporation. They're probably more interested in books and CDs and DVDs than they are in retro games. But they say, you know, hey, this retro game thing's hot now. Well, we got to get in on it. Hell, that's what GameStop did. They ignored retro games for like 12 years and got back into it. Why not? But what I'm saying is this has to be thought of outside of, well, this is just a fucking Marky Mark CD from 91 that no one really cares about, or you can get the music anywhere else. You know, if people are chucking stuff into the free bin when either they shouldn't, they should be getting some sort of cash back for it or traded because it's a little dirty or stuff's being taken out. The console thing, a potentially broken console could be used for parts. Doesn't mean it's unusable. I do not want local stores deciding and local employees not trained deciding again what is quote unquote completely unusable and what is not. That just really bothers me.